Good day, everybody. I'm sure we'll have more people jump on. I know it's right at 11 o'clock, but I wanted to get started because Dr. Caroline Swope is going to take us through a good bit of architectural styles in Alabama residences in a short amount of time. So I want us to have plenty of time. My name is Paige Thomas. I'm the Certified Local Government Coordinator for the Alabama Historical Commission. A couple of things before we start. You're muted and your camera is off right now so that the meeting runs smoothly. At the end, I'm going to try to change that if we have time for question and answers. Um, in the meantime, if you would go ahead in the chat, if you haven't already, and please put your name and the organization or city that you're with, that would be wonderful. Um, and then if you can also, if you have any questions, just enter them in the chat. I'm going to keep up with it as we go. And that way, if we have any trouble turning on cameras and the microphone at the end, I'll have questions that we can try to answer. So I want to introduce Dr. Caroline Swope. She works for the city of Decatur and also has her own consulting firm. Caroline is going to tell you just a little bit more about herself, and we're going to jump in.
Thank you, Paige. So delighted that you are all able to join us this morning for House Rules. There's a lot of housing styles here in Alabama, and to give you a little bit on my background, I currently manage the CLG portion of Decatur's historic preservation districts. And part of that role is I oversee contractors that do survey and inventory work within our district. So between managing those projects for the city, and when I first moved to Alabama, I consulted on a number of projects for Huntsville, Tuscumbia, down in Homewood. I started tallying up how many buildings I'd surveyed in the state and assisted with overseeing. I kind of stopped when I got to 4,000. It's a lot. And when you look at the houses a lot, you start to see the patterns in them. It also has a lot to do with my training. I lived in Metro Seattle for about 20 years. I received a doctorate in architectural history, specifically focusing on American residential architecture from 1880 till about 1930. And Seattle, I'm a native of Virginia. Seattle's very different. They actually have a lot of craftsman houses, and that has a lot to do with what period that city developed in. And as I started exploring the districts, and this map here sort of shows you, the different neighborhoods in the city, question people always, what style is my house? What style is it? What style is it? And I started working with a local historical society, and then it sort of morphed into a book on the styles of residential architecture in Seattle from about 1870 to about 1950. And so at one point I figured out I had surveyed several thousand houses in Washington state. So I'm going to try to condense like 20 some years worth of knowledge on residential housing styles into a lecture today. And we're going to kind of see how this goes. Hopefully I will not run out of time. The major house styles we're going to look at in Alabama between 1850 and 1920, this is a list. You will see a lot of revivals, a lot of focus on classical. So we start off with classical in the early settlement stages of the state. Then it becomes a little more detailed and it sort of hones in on Greek revival. We pick up Italianate right at the time of the Civil War and some Gothic revival. And then post-Civil War, you start seeing Second Empire, Queen Anne, folk Victorian, free classic, colonial revival, because we like our columns, neoclassical, we like our columns big. And then by the early to mid 20th century, you sort of start seeing Tudor revival, craftsman, and American Foursquare. So one of the things that's always interesting, I'm in a number of Facebook groups with houses, and people will always put up pictures and say, hey, what style is this? And last night I was scrolling through, and there's a house group that I belong to, and someone put this picture up, and I thought it was a really interesting example of sort of what people get told about styles and how these things sort of get internalized. So this particular family is looking at purchasing a house. For those of you in Decatur, you might recognize this house. I did a double take when I saw it because it's a few blocks away from me. I didn't expect to see this in a national group. They put up a picture of the house and they said, hey, the real estate agent and the tax assessor have it as 1930s, but I don't know what it is. What style is it? Does anybody know? And so immediately someone says, oh, it was craftsman, but I'm not sure, but I think it was craftsman. And then the default is always, oh, it's vernacular, which means it's using lots of things. And I had messaged the property owner directly because this is in my city. And I said, hey, let me go to archives and pull some data. So this morning I went down to archives and I was able, because I kept looking at it, and in the post I said, hey, it's a Victorian house. I can't tell you specifically what style. It's been altered. We'll get to that a little bit later in this talk. But I said I can look at the main form of the house and tell you, I would guess 1910 would be my guess. And I said the porch is not original. Like the form of the porch might be original, but the building elements in the porch have been replaced. So I had pulled a real estate map, a fire insurance map, and it shows the house 1927. You see it there. Unfortunately, we don't have maps earlier that would give me an earlier date, but I went down into archives this morning and did some digging, and the property was purchased in 1912, and 1916 is the first year that our county would list if a building was on the property. 1916, a building's listed on the property. So we now know between 1912 and 1916, and did a little more digging, pulled some phone directories, and I found out that that address was being used for a house by 1917. So we know for sure it's somewhere in that build date, which takes us back to, well, what style is it? It's a Victorian. To get more specific than that, it's a little more difficult, and I'm going to have you guys follow up with that in a while when we get to that style. But we're going to look at houses now. We're going to start with early classical revival. What should you be seeing? This is a very grand house. A lot of the early classical revivals in Alabama, some look like this, some are more modest. We like our columns in the South. And so you're going to see a very well proportioned house. It is almost going to be bilateral symmetrical, which is, let's think of a butterfly. If a butterfly closes its wings and then opens them, both halves are equal. So with most early classical revival buildings, you could draw a line through the middle, both sides should look the same. Now you can have additions later, but from that first run, the front of the house typically is identical. They like the entry porches, and they're really going to be dominated by these full height entry porches. Our doors are going to be articulated. If there's significant resources, you're going to see a fan light. Sometimes you're just going to see a simpler transom. It's going to depend on the location and the budget that the owners have. More remote areas of the state, they're less likely to have something that fancy, unless you really have someone with tremendous resources who can pull in experts from outside the area for construction. Windows, they like to have 5 windows per a level, or a door. So if you look at this, you look at the first floor, you have 2 windows, then a door, then 2 windows. So that's what we call 5 bays. They're 5 openings. Second floor, we have 5 windows. They're matched. But here, sometimes because of the heat, you will actually see doors and porches on that upper level instead of another window. Sometimes they're smaller. There are only 3 bays per floor. Really grand houses, you could get 7. You can get 1-story versions of these houses. The columns are going to be Roman, Doric, or Tuscan. So what that means is typically they're smooth. And sometimes in the state, because they didn't have the resources to do circular columns, you might find wood columns that are tapered and rectangular or square instead. So what does that look like in practice? This is Shadow Lawn. This is here in Decatur. It was built right around 1874. So look, it's symmetrical, it's 5 bays. They do have a porch on the second level. They don't have the round columns, they have the tapered. Now, what I can't tell you with these columns, we don't have super old photos of this house. It is entirely possible that it could have had a round column. There's no way to really know unless you start doing some deeper investigative work. And sometimes with houses of this age, even then you won't get an answer on it. Other example, and you're going to see, I like to think of these as they're all kin to each other. So it's like going to a family reunion where the family, most people are redheads. Every person's going to look a little bit different, but they're going to share family traits. This one's also in Decatur. This is the Dancy Polk house. You'll see in this case, again, they had to go with smaller columns because they double decked this out. This is the oldest house in the city. It's 1829. The porch is not as big, but again, by 1829, Decatur hadn't even been a city for a decade yet. So they're really starting to grow wealth. So you would expect the house, even though this is a very large and very grand house, to be a little more subtle in its ornamentation because you're still very much on a frontier area. This one's in Tuscumbia. There's some conflicting dates on this house between 1840 and 1870, but you see, again, that family resemblance. And if you want to see what they look like in brick, this one is also in Tuscumbia. This is Belmont. This one is actually owned by the Alabama Historical Commission, and it is open to the public. This one was constructed between 1828 and 1832. So you really see that same resemblance. What we're seeing here is a regional style, probably due to finances and availability of materials. If you've noticed on a lot of these, we do actually have sort of that double decker porch. We don't have as many that are going to look like this, where you just have a single porch opening. But a lot of that also has to do with the weather here, and it's trying to open up and keep those porches and keep breezes moving. The next major style in the US that develops is Greek Revival, and that develops around 1825. You will see examples as late as 1860. So we're still following our Greek temples, but we're going to get more refined. You have architecture books that are out. They're sort of like pattern books that can go with itinerant carpenters from region to region, and they do very much so follow these. So you're going to see more attention to specific details in terms of the columns typically being much more detailed to look like a Greek column. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. You're still going to have your symmetry. You're going to have some pretty substantial cornice lines. So they're going to start emphasizing those. I'm going to see, I think you can see here my arrow is moving right around here on this, right underneath the eave. This is a cornice line. You'll also see how the cornice returns on this gable end, and then it stops. It doesn't go any further. That's very typical for Greek Revival. Your roof is typically gabled. This is a gable roof. Now this roof, the gables are at the ends, not at the front and the back. Alabama, we have a tendency to turn ours. You will often see the gables at the front and the back instead. We have our entry porch, sometimes full width entry porch. This one is a small one. We like our side lights on the doors. We like our transoms. One reason for this, if you think the hallways did not have windows because they're interior space, you still need light. This is in an era of candlelight. So how are people getting the light? They're putting transoms and side lights around their doors to get that. So this is a model of Greek Revival. This is a temple at Paestum in Italy. What makes a Greek column a Greek column? Well, they typically are fluted like this. But in the early days with Alabama, that's not always an option because it has to do with construction techniques. So ours might be more smooth. And you see that temple front. It is that standard Greek temple front. Now, remember I said Alabama, we like to turn ours so the temple faces the front. This is a perfect example. This is Magnolia Grove. This is in Greensboro, Alabama. This is another state-owned property, so you can go and visit it. And look, it's got the giant columns. Now they're not fluted because they're working with brick that has then been limestone wash over it. They're not at the point where they really have the technical ability in the wilds of this state to be doing flutes yet. You'll see that a little later. We've got our transom. We've got that symmetrical facade. It's a pretty big porch. Just down the street, this is a privately owned house. This one is Magnolia Hall, which not to be confused with Magnolia Grove. These houses are literally maybe a mile apart, maybe 2 miles. But you'll see, again, it's like a first cousin. You're watching a very similar rhythm here. These columns are fluted because this house is 1858. This house is amazing because we have a Xerox of the original contract between the homeowner and the builder that constructed it. And it lays out like the nails, the finishes, everything, which is really rare for this time period. So in terms of the columns, if you'll notice, there's 2 main types we typically see. You're either going to look at Doric, and they have a very simple, a very square top, or you're going to look at Ionic, which is sort of the little spiral curled top. Those are the 2 that you're going to be seeing with this style. On the fancy homes, you're going to be seeing what we call dental work. And I always think, I've never had anyone definitively tell me why it's called dental work, but to me, the dentals, these little square things, they kind of look like teeth lined up. So that's maybe why we use the term. Here you have your Ionic columns, you have your flutes. So everything here is copying fairly closely what they're getting out of their pattern books for Greek. Here's a detail of some of that dental work. and then a detail of Magnolia Hall, the front door, so you can really see the side lights and the transom, and they're using them upstairs too. And they even copy the molding. If you look on the second floor of that porch, you look up here, it's like a little temple pediment is placed right over the door. I mean, they're really pushing this style. They really want to show the sophistication and the worldliness of a national style, and it's used very much in New England too, and this is sort of how it's interpreted. For smaller examples, this is the Goodwin Hamilton house. This is in Sylacauga. Um, it's the same formula, but it's just one story. But you could imagine if it was 2 stories, it would look very much like the houses we just looked at. The only difference is this one is clapboard instead of brick. Another small one, this one is in Carrollton, Alabama. This is the Hugh Wilson house. Same thing, one story, but you see the family resemblance. Now, sometimes what people struggle with on styles is they'll recognize the big style. They'll recognize it when it's big and fancy and has all the curly cues. And they struggle a little bit with naming it when it doesn't have as many. And I like to use what I call my paint chip color analysis on these. Everybody would look at these paint chips in the paint store and they're going to say, oh yeah, they're blue. Now, some are very blue. They have a lot of blue pigment in them. And some are very pale blue, which means they have less of that pigment in them. Houses are the same way. Some are very high style. They'd be the equivalent of the dark blue. They've got every doodad, curly cue, stylistic detail you can throw at them. Other houses are much more subdued. People were on a budget. Maybe they didn't have access to the same designers. They're like a pale blue version. They are still in the same family, but they're not going to have as much of the extravagant ornamentation. Or maybe it's been removed over time. That can happen as well. So the next major style that we're going to look at is Italianate. It's longer at the national level. It's 1840 to 1885. Alabama struggles a little because we have the Civil War in there. And so we have some early examples. And then really after the Civil War, it isn't until Italianate is almost old-fashioned and out of style by the time the state really starts building major houses again at the large mansion sort of level. So we don't have a ton of Italianate in the state, but we do have some. They normally will have a low-pitched roof. It's called Italianate because they were thought to be modeled, very loosely modeled, after villas in Italy. That's where the original idea sort of came from. So the eaves are going to be pretty deep. They're going to have deep overhangs. They often have some pretty amazing decorative brackets if they have not rotted off over time. Really fancy examples of Italianate could have a cupola or a tower with them. It's pretty rare to get a 1-story Italianate. They're normally 2-story houses. The windows can have pretty elaborate crowns around them. So they're often arched, although not always, and they'll have some pretty elaborate molding. Take a sip of water here. So this is Kenworthy Hall. This is in Perry County. It was built between 1858 and 1860, so they finished right at the start of the Civil War. Now, if you're looking at the front and you're thinking, well, that's sort of simple, this house has seen some changes. I do not have a historic photo that shows what the front porch looked like originally on the house, but we do have a historic photos from the 30s that shows the back porch. And you see the back porch, it doesn't look like this now. Most of that porch is gone. It's much more ornate. So I think it's safe to say the front of the house, you can see it had shutters by the this is like a 1930s, 1940s photo. So the house that we see now is a little more simple than what it would have looked like originally when constructed. But some still hold a lot of their detailing. This is Kendall Manor. This is in Eufaula, 1861 to 1865. And you can see how this one has the cupola. Italianate houses, the high style examples are much more flashy than our Greek Revival. But we also have simple examples. This is a duplex. This one's in Decatur. It was built to be a rental for 2 families, but it is Italianate. It looks almost more like a commercial building than residential at the upper stories. The porch is not original. I don't know the date of it. I was there when they were remodeling it, and as beautiful as that porch railing is, it's fairly recent, but I don't know the date of it, and I don't know what it looked like originally. This is a ship train house in Selma. This was built about 1860. So again, this one's pretty recognizable as Italianate. You see most of the high style, but I want to show you one that is reading as Italianate, but it's very simple. This one's in Decatur. We're not entirely sure the build date on it. You see the cornice, it's brick. The front porch is not original. The house has had some alterations, but it's reading as an Italianate style. And it's one that when I meet with my colleagues, we kind of scratch our heads over it and we're like, gosh, we wish we had some photos, but we don't, unfortunately. But it sort of shows you what a simpler version might look like. Also at the same time period, also one that we really only have a handful of in the state, but when we do, they're pretty spectacular, is Gothic Revival. And if you're noticing, there's a lot of these all coming about the same time. This is an era where you start to have Americans, architecture is becoming a profession. You have Americans going to Europe and they're completely enamored and they're taking everything they're seeing and they're making up stuff left and right. They're doing mishmashes of things, and that's what's hitting the design magazines. If you were to open the magazines during the era, everyone's excited over the latest style. So Gothic Revival, 1840, 1880. Gothic revivals, you almost always have a gable roof, cross gable normally. So you have to think gables, they intersect. So here you have gables on the end, gables on the front. The roof pitch is going to go much steeper. They're going to have what are called verge boards. And these are verge boards here. You see these decorative scalloped boards that are right on the end of the gable eave. Most houses will have them, but they're plain. They're just plain rectangular boards nailed on. Not Gothic Revival. They're going to town. And they're using the fact that milling, and you have sawmills now that can do much more ornate production. People are very excited over this. They want bling. They want things that are fancy and really over the top. This is a good style for that. The wall surface is going to extend into this gable. So if you notice, there's no break here. This eave line doesn't continue. As a matter of fact, the window actually goes up into what you would kind of read as attic space. The windows, they'll often use pointed arches when they have the wall space to handle them. The entry porch will normally have a Tudor arch. So if you look at this little arch, it's barely an arch. It's kind of flattened out. That's a Tudor arch. Entry porches, full story, often full length, is what you're going to see. So what does that look like in Alabama? This is the gingerbread house in Opa-locka. It's pretty ornate. I love the verge boards. It just looks like someone has taken lace. Now, not everything on the house is original. The little sort of balconies that come off of the windows, that's like standard big box store mesh. That's not original. I don't know if there was something there originally, if that was added later. Another example, this is a Demopolis. This is the Ash Cottage. It's 1858, but it was a remodel of an 1832. So it was a much earlier house that went through sort of like a massive plastic surgery to turn it into the new style. But here you see the verge boards, you see the painted, the pointed arches on the windows. It's the cross gable design, lots of curved sort of ornamentation. Whoops, didn't go through. And I put this one, and this one's not in Alabama. This one's actually in my hometown, which is Lexington, Virginia. This is our Presbyterian manse originally. Love this house as a child. It was always one of my favorites. Of course, as a kid, I didn't know that it was, considered Gothic Revival. I didn't know what that was. But when I figured out the style had a name, I was like, oh, that's the house from home. So you'll see, I mean, many states apart, but they're all looking at the same design magazines. Also, around the time of the Civil War, we start to see Second Empire. It's very easily identifiable because you have to have a mansard roof to have a Second Empire house. Like, that's pretty much a requirement. Most mansard roofs have dormers, and you see dormers here. You normally have pretty deep eaves with decorations. Sometimes the only way you can really tell an Italianate from a Second Empire is that mansard roof. It's just that shift in roof. The mansard roof, it is a French roof design. It was designed to provide more living space normally for servants on the second floor. Now, if you're thinking like, okay, this kind of looks familiar, but I don't know why, most of us know Second Empire because most of us know the Addams Family house. Now, this is a fictional house. It did not exist. This is a Hollywood design, but it was modeled off of a Second Empire. And so that's why you kind of associate this style often with kind of spooky things. This one is in Decatur. We think this one was built about 1887 from one of the largest property owners in the city. It is fabulous with that ornate front porch work. And you can see the dormers are kind of interesting. They're arched a little bit. I've got an image from this side so you can see that mansard roof a little bit better. And I also have some detail images that are going to show you the doors. These are probably the most amazing doors we have in the city, and these are original. It's very unusual to have double doors in our city. Like if you go to some cities, they have them. Our city, only a handful of historic homes have them. Most of them were added later because someone was trying to modernize. This is one of the only original ones. The glass was different originally. The current owners had this glass installed, but it is fabulous. And then, of course, a detail of that woodwork on the porch. Over in Huntsville, this is the Pleasance House. This one has a tower, 1889. But again, the same details, the hoods over the windows, the deep eaves, the brackets. You have a mansard tower on this one. This one's in Selma. This was built as the rectory for the Queen of Peace Catholic Church. Much smaller porch, a little more commercial looking, but it still has the same design elements. So again, it's like that family tree. You're following the same hair color, the same eye color, the same nose line. Then from 1880 to 1900, we get the sort of the mother of all ornate styles for American houses, and that's Queen Anne. So some people will call these Victorian. Victorian has multiple different styles in that era. Queen Anne is one of the Victorian styles. The fastest way to identify Queen Anne, because sometimes all of the really fun molding is missing, it has rotted off or been removed because it was no longer popular at one point, is if you were doing a bird's eye view, if you were floating above and looking down, you're going to see a very irregular plan. We don't have that perfect symmetry. We don't have a rectangle. We don't have a square. We have somewhere in there a box with every kind of appendage jutting out of it and multiple porches, often porches on the second level. These people loved the irregularity. The roof pitches have a tendency to be steep. They often have a front-facing gable. The bigger the house, the more likely you are to have a side gable. They like texture, so you won't just have maybe clapboard siding. You might have shingles on part of it. They really don't want a smooth wall appearance. The front porch is going to be partial or full length. It's often asymmetrical, and it will go around the sides. That's where you really start seeing your side porches. So what does this look like in practice? This is one of my favorites. This one's here in Decatur. It was built right around 1903. This one may very well be a free classic. I'll show you what that is in a minute. That's our next style. So this one might be sort of merging into the next one, but I will show you some great details. Shingles is the different house, but it's Queen Anne. All kinds of shingles, interesting texture in that eave line. They have a little bit of stucco as well. This is actually one from Seattle, but this was one of the best examples I ever had of the different types of shingles. There's a neighborhood in Seattle called Ballard. It used to be its own city until it was annexed. It was the shingle capital of the United States at the time, and the sawmills there cranked out by the thousands all of these decorative shingles, and I'm guessing that probably the owner of this house may have worked in one of those sawmills and was able to pick up all these different designs, because let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 different shingle designs that I can count on this. It's pretty impressive. They really liked it can be called spindle work, it can be called gingerbreading, some people call it lace, but that decorative woodworking that you're seeing on the eave ends, on the porches. The black and white picture is one actually from Seattle. The color picture is a detail from here in Decatur. Just really amazing detail. The greatest challenge with this is over time, these have a tendency to either be unpopular and people cover them or remove them, or they will rot off. So it's really cool when you find a house that has them. These are what we've referred to as clipped corners or sometimes canted corners. It's literally as if someone took a butter knife and shaved off a corner of the building, and so the window then is placed onto a different plane from the other walls. And they often have really neat sort of spindle curve work around them. Oops, drop something, excuse me while I get it. There we go. These are what are called Queen Anne windows, and there's 2 types. The black and white photo, that's one from Seattle. It shows you it's just the upper sash with multiple lights, whereas more traditionally, you will have the stained glass in them, both upper and lower lights. You will see this, it's literally this particular window. Like if I was identifying a house and I was saying it has 5 windows and the center window looks like this, and I would say the center window is what we would call a Queen Anne sash. So it is literally identified as a Queen Anne sash. So if you said a house has a Queen Anne sash, I know immediately it's looking like one of these. There's really no such thing as a Queen Anne, whoops, door, but you get multiple variations of doors. The one with the far left, the wood door with the amazing transom and side lights and leaded glass, that's a fairly ornate house. You'll get simpler doors like the blue door, which is it's on a Queen Anne, but it's a much simpler one. Sometimes you get oval, which is really fun. That's the one there sort of on the left middle. And then the one on the far right is from a salvage yard. It's been painted, unfortunately, but you can see it has about every type of woodwork on it imaginable. This is another one here, Indicator. This one was built about 1890. This one has its original slate roof, which is amazing. And the slate is multicolored, so you'll see a little bit of design in it as well. So it's pretty neat to see. It's simpler on the details. Those porch columns, I would guess, are not original. It probably had more Victorian era turned posts originally. Porches get a lot of abuse in the South. We've got termites. There's no way you're going to have an 1890 house with the original front porch. Most of these porches are rotting off by the 1920s or 30s. They're getting replaced with 20s or 30s porches. Those porches are normally coming off in the 60s. They're getting replaced again. This one is in Tuscumbia. This is the Edward Alman House, 1888. But again, you can identify it. It's got the irregular plan. It's got some spindle work on there. You'll start to see windows that are what we call ganged or paired. So if you notice there, this house should not have shutters. So take the shutters off, because those shutters, if they were real, couldn't function because you've got paired windows. And you will not see shutters on houses with paired windows until the 1920s or 30s. And there's a reason for it. And when we get there, I'll show you what that means. There's another one here, Indicator. This one, we don't have a concrete build date on it. But again, you see that really ornate woodwork. You see multiple textures on your siding material, the steep gable. Chimney's not original. That's a rebuild on the chimney. The original chimney probably had some interesting lines. And what does it look like when you get a little cottage? You can get some really cute Queen Anne cottages. This one, I adore this house. I can't believe its original spindle work has made it. It's in fantastic shape. This one is Indicator. This is another one, Indicator, just a few blocks away. This one has pretty significant spindle work too. And if you notice, it's some of the same spindle work. So clearly purchased from the same place. This one is in Tuscumbia, different spindle work, different sawmill, different locations. This one's about 1900. That's kind of on your tail end of the style. And this one is also in Tuscumbia. This is about 1890. You'll see it's got that wonderful 3-bay window, amazing lacy sort of verge board. Front porch has been replaced. So those are not the original porch supports. It probably had more ornate porch work originally. So what happens is then you have houses that were maybe built in the same time period as the Queen Anne, but they were budget houses. You know, they were people middle class. They didn't have the means, so they're not going to be as ornate. We typically refer to those as a folk Victorian. It can be challenging sometimes to identify a house as a folk Victorian or a Queen Anne, because you could have had a Queen Anne that over time the details have been removed, right? They've fallen off, they've been replaced, they weren't fashionable. Normally you will look for a folk Victorian either L-shaped, which is what we have here. If you were up in the air and you look down, it would look like an L, or you will just have a simple gable-ended or gable-fronted building. So the building mass is much simpler. They often are just one story. They will have some brackets under the eaves, but not always, and a little bit of spindle work detailing. So what does this look like in practice? Here's one Indicator. I'm assuming it was folk Victorian, but I don't know for sure because that front porch is not original. Here's one that That spindle work is not original. It's a reproduction that someone put in. So I'm guessing it may have been a little less ornate originally. It's a little hard to know because, again, this is reproduction woodwork. This is a very simple one. This is in Decatur. Interesting siding because it's a grooved siding. And this one is also in Decatur. And so you see this one's L-shaped if you were to look at it from above, and it has a very simple door with transom, nothing too over the top, very traditional, very conservative in its interpretation. There's a detail of the door, which I love. And then this one is in Tuscumbia. So again, we see that really simple L-shaped, a moderate amount of gingerbreading on it, but it's not dripping with that gingerbreading or that spindle work. Now, at the very tail end of the era, we have a shift in styles. I love this photo because it actually shows two of them side by side. These are both Victorian era houses. The smaller one on the left would be a folk Victorian. The one on the right is what we call free classic, and that is the last Victorian style. So free classics, they're going to look just like a Queen Anne. They're going to have the fancy examples, they're going to have the massing, they're going to have the towers. But the details, instead of the gingerbreading, their details are going to be classical. They're going to have classical columns. They might have a Palladian window. And that's where you see the shift. And it's a very specific time period. It's 1893 to about 1910. Now, this is one from Ballard up in Washington, but you can see it's got the Victorian elements, but there it's got the little columns on the front porch, and there's very limited gingerbreading. This has to do with why this style was invented. So if you were getting your ladies' home journal and your pattern books, and Queen Anne was the style, that's what you're going to see. Then in 1893, we have the Columbian World's Fair. It is in Chicago. It is nicknamed the White City. The greatest architects and designers of their era went together to do all the architectural planning for the World's Fair. It was based on buildings in Greece and Rome, classical buildings and neoclassical buildings. So what you're looking at on the left is the Villa Rotunda. That is a very famous Renaissance building by Palladio, about 1567 to 1590s. What you're looking at on the right is the Palace of Fine Arts at the Columbian World's Fair, and you can kind of see where they got their inspiration from. And they're very much copying these designs. So you have to imagine all of your architects for houses are doing Queen Anne Victorians. And then everybody hears about or visits the Columbian World's Fair. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Everything was painted white. The reason it was painted white, they invented compressed air guns for the fair because it was fast. Like they had to get this thing up and running. Most of these buildings, believe it or not, are essentially plaster of Paris that are reinforced with straw. They were just designed to be there for a year. Most of them didn't last more than a year. But the impact these buildings made on American architecture is very difficult to overstate because everybody was enamored. These white buildings, these classical details. This city, because it was like a temporary city, had electric lighting. It was clean. It had boulevards. It had planned parks. The American public, they all wanted something like this. Well, if you're an architectural designer and you've just finished making a whole book on Queen Anne style plans, now you got a challenge. So the first thing they do is they use Queen Anne style plans and they just strip off all the Queen Anne detailing and start putting classical detailings on. So that's why many of your free classic houses are basically Queen Anne's, but the detailing is different because it's just a stylistic change. This one's in Decatur. You know, the massing is irregular. It has a wraparound porch, but look at the detailing. We have classical dental work. We have columns. We have a Palladian window, and I'll do a detail. That is a Palladian window in the top. It is named for Palladian, even though Palladio did not invent it. It was invented by someone else, but it is that center arched window with a smaller rectangular window on each side. So to show you these styles, I mean, it goes everywhere. This is one in Tacoma, Washington. It was down the street from where I lived for many years. Complete example of free classic. And you'll see, looky, we've got Palladian window. We've got our porch with columns. Very simple, no gingerbreading at all, but it's irregular massing. You're going to see that porch continues on the side. Here in Decatur, this is a good example of the free classic. You've got your classical detailing placed onto a Queen Anne base. This is another one in Decatur. This is one of my favorite Queen Anne's, the classic versions. Really simple, irregular massing, but there's none of the gingerbread. That's all gone. So we're not doing that anymore because we're focusing on classical. So this is how the classical revival really takes over the Victorian era. Now in the US, we never stop loving the classical revival. Like, it's kind of our thing. Because colonial buildings were classical. And because colonial buildings were classical, we keep following it. So colonial revival is popular. And it's popular from 1880s to the 1950s. And there's a big range in housing styles between the 80s and the 50s. So you can see a wide range of colonial revival. But they go back to the symmetry. They want that front door centered. Our windows, by the time we get to the 20th century, they'll often pair them. The reason they're pairing them is that gives you more light. There are different types of windows. Some will have multi-lights in both sashes. Some will only have them in the upper. I'll show you a detail in a minute. The front door is normally accented with porch columns, and we have a fan light, maybe some side lights, maybe a transom. These are all sort of things that we're following in this colonial revival. So this is a colonial revival from the 1920s. Most of our colonial revivals are more like 1900 to 1920s. This one's actually in Tacoma, Washington. It was also down the street from me, but I love that it had these leaded glass side lights. I used to keep waiting for them to paint it something other than white because it's like the ghost house on the street. There is a sun porch. You will see sun porches with them sometimes. This one is also in Tacoma. I love this one for the front door. So you have that classical, that colonial revival front door. You have your columns. But this is an era, because this house is from the 40s, where they weren't just focused on the symmetry. So they were starting to play with that a little bit more. So a little bit closer to home here, this is in Huntsville. This one was built in the 1920s. Perfect symmetry, fan light, shutters. You've got your sun porch, and it looks like it's an enclosed porch because those windows are not original, and you can kind of see the way it's framed out. It may have just been an open porch originally. That's giving you that stability. And if you look at those windows, those are what we call multi-light windows. So the upper sash has 6 panes of glass, the lower sash has 6 panes of glass. So that's a double hung. And in the field, we would say that's a 6/6, 6/6 double hung. So if I hear that, I know immediately that's what the window looks like. But by the 20th century, even in the 19th century, they didn't need these little tiny panes of glass. Now, colonial buildings, if you go to Williamsburg, they're going to have little panes of glass. You go to Boston, because they could not manufacture big sheets. And in the early colonial era, the glass was imported from England. It was coming over by ship. Even if they had the ability to make big sheets, could you imagine the breakage? So they were sending little teeny panes of glass. Well, by the early 20th century, we have the ability to make bigger sheets of glass. So people are not quite, you're going to see some changing on how they handle windows. And you'll start to see what we call cottage style windows. So the upper sash, to look colonial, will have 6, maybe 8 lights, but the bottom sash is completely one pane clear. You have a better line of vision, so that you'll start seeing these windows in houses from the 20s. You won't see them in the colonial revivals that are earlier than that, but by the 20s, they're pretty common. This house is symmetrical because it has a sun porch on one side, and then it has a porte cochere, which is just an area to park your car, on the other. This one is here in Decatur. This one is a 1939 version. This is another Decatur one. This one, I love the fan light over the door. It's really interesting with the recessed windows on the first floor. This is 1944. So as you can see, a 1944 version of colonial revival is going to look very different from a 1920s, but it still has the same basic features. It's symmetrical. It's rectangular. It has, this is the divided, this one is 8/8. But we're sort of following that. And I think I have a detail. Yeah, there's a detail of the windows there. Now, some colonial revivals, they get really hung up with the door, and there's a reason for that. It's a very special door. This is one of the early plantations in Virginia. This is Westover. It's in Charles City County, Virginia. 1730. It's about as colonial as you get. That's the front door, which actually faces the river, because the river is how they moved around on the James. Look at that door and you'll see the detail there. So the photograph, the black and white photo of the door, you can compare that image that's drawing next to it came out of a design manual that architects and builders could use. And the itinerant builders would have these manuals with them. It's almost like a catalog, and the owner could be like, oh, I like that door. Like, oh, we can make that. That door is called the Westover door. It is what is called a broken pediment. So if you notice, instead of it being a perfect triangle, it's broken with the scrolls, and then it has what looks like an acorn or maybe a pineapple. It's a little unclear historically what it would have been in the Greek era. In the South, we like to think of them as pineapples, even if they're not, because we kind of have a thing with our pineapples and hospitality. But I want you to look at that door. Here it is on a 1932 house here in Decatur. So that Westover pediment, and again, as an architectural historian, if someone said, oh, the house has a Westover pediment, I'd be like, oh, I know what that's, the pediment with the scrolls. Or if someone said, hey, they have a broken pediment, if you notice the pediment's broken, but it doesn't have the scrolls in it. Slightly different variation. This house is also in Decatur, 1947. This one has the cottage style windows where you have all the little multi-lights above, but none below. No porch here, but we've got our transom and side lights with the door, just an entry stoop. Another one here in Decatur, 1949, Colonial Revival. We don't have a porch, we have a giant patio area. But again, you sort of see the rhythm that they're following. Now there's a subset in colonial that's referred to as Dutch colonial. And the colonials we've been looking at so far are based on English colonial. That's what the English colonists built when they came to Virginia. But if you go to New York and New Jersey, they didn't build that because they had Dutch colonists, and they were building houses with what we call a Dutch gambrel roof. That's what a Dutch gambrel roof looks like. This house was in New York. It is an unidentified one, but we often use it to show the style because it has such a great roof line. You can really see it. What does it look like in the wild if you're in your neighborhoods? Sometimes it faces the front. This is an example from 1912. That's here in Decatur. Dutch colonial. There's only one identifier to make something Dutch colonial. It's the gambrel roof. It has to have the gambrel roof. That's what makes it. The other details are mostly inconsequential. So your older ones, like 1912, they will only have it facing the front. By the time you get to the 20s, they like to move it to the side. So this is the same house. It's just painted different colors because the photos were taken in different years. The one where the house is white is an angled image, so you can really see that gambrel roof. The one from the front, you mostly see the big dormer. Because that roof line, the way it works, the way it does, where it really makes that second floor smaller, you'll normally see either one giant full-length dormer, which is what you have here to give you extra space, or this example over in Tuscumbia, which is from the 1920s, they have 3 dormers in a row. And then we have one in Decatur. This is a front-on view, so I can't show you that side with the roof, but you can see the pitch. This one also has 3 dormers on it. So it's very different, 1949 version, whoops, 1920s version, 1907's version with some of these. So you see, but they all share resemblance. Well, we still haven't gotten rid of our columns because we still like them. And if people want something a little bigger than a colonial, they're going to have a tendency to go with full-length columns again, double-decker columns, the gargantuan columns. So we have a neoclassical revival, 1895 to 1855. What makes this different from Greek revival? It's much more mismatched. It's a little bit of different classical and colonial revival elements from all over. It's not as stylistically pure. So you'll see them have a little more fun with it. It may have a front portico, or it may have a giant full-length porch. The columns have a tendency to be Ionic or to go full-blown Corinthian. Corinthian capitals are very fancy, and that's what you see in the drawing. It looks like a plant is on top of the column because it was based on a acanthus plant being placed on top of the column. So they're very ornate. So this is an example in Decatur. Now this house was actually a Victorian era house that went through the mother of all remodels in the 1930s or 40s. I'm still tracking this one. And they completely turned it inside out, and it is now full-blown neoclassical revival with the giant porch. Love the front door detailing on there. But you can see it in a simpler form. This one's also in Decatur. This one's about 1944. Again, symmetry, you might have a side porch of some sort, but we're really going for scale here. So what does it look like when you make it smaller? Still neoclassical, but maybe you only have budget for a one-story house. That's what you get here. This is an 1958 version. So much smaller budget, but it looks very much like the others. It's just one story. So we're actually going to get a break from our columns for a while because we're going to look at the last couple styles. Tudor Revival is one that's popular between 1890, mostly your bigger houses, all the way to 1940, mostly your smaller homes. Now we're going to get really steep pitched roof, like a really steeply pitched cross gable. The facade is dominated by the gables. They like their decorative chimneys. You might even see chimneys on the front of the house. Windows in multiple groupings. Sometimes they use multi-pane glazing. Sometimes you get leaded windows. Sometimes you get casement windows. You will often see a front door or an entry porch that has a rounded arch. And with these, it's kind of cool because if you have a rounded front door, chances are you have your original front door. It's really hard to replace those doors. So people have a tendency to leave them and not remodel. What are Tudors based on? They're based on English Tudor. This is a 1630 English house. It was actually packed up and sent over to a museum in Stanton, Virginia that was showcasing building styles that the state was modeled on. Look at that chimney. 1630. Look at that chimney and that half timbering. So if you're going to look at some details with Tudor, we have half timbering here filled in with brick. We've got some fancy brickwork on some chimneys. We have our rounded arch entry, and we have two different versions of rounded arch doors. So what does all this look like when it's put in a package? Well, your big house, the one on the left, that's here in Decatur, that's 1900. The house on the right, that is the Skinner House in Selma, 1928. Look at the chimneys. Look at the half timbering. I mean, there's the gables, the multiple gables. What does it look like when you go smaller? What if you had a whole row of little ones together? This one's in Tacoma, Washington, 1928. Most of these, the developer came in. Those little sort of ski slope roofs that flare. Here's a detail of one of those houses. This house is 1928 also because it's that development with that door and the little leaded glass window up in that front gable. All brick here in Decatur, 1928. Front chimney, front and center. Those are steel windows in this house. They're casement windows, so those are the windows that crank out. You'll start to see those with some houses in the 20s, particularly some steel windows. I love this one for its brickwork. This one's back in Tacoma, Washington. It's a 1936 example, but it was up the street for me, so I have a lot of photos of it because it was just really interesting, that half timbering with the brick. This one is a 1936 house. Back to Decatur, 1934. Pretty spectacular doorway. This is a little simpler, if you notice, a little bit smaller, but they're still focusing on that doorway. The next neighborhood over, this one's also in Decatur, 1940. We got to have our porch on the front because we're in the South and it gets hot, but we're going to put arches on it. So again, we sort of moved away from the columns. This is another Decatur one, 1944. There's no front porch on this one, but that chimney takes center. And then literally like 3 houses down the street, another 1944 Tudor. Very simple, doesn't have the focus on the chimney. It doesn't, it has no eave line, but we're still that steeply pitched. The biggest determination of Tudor Revival is that steeply pitched roof because it has a roof line like none of the other houses do. So if you go the other end of that and you go from a steeply pitched roof to a lowly pitched roof, you're going to get craftsman. Some people call this a bungalow. A bungalow is a form and not a style. A bungalow has to do with like more the square footage of the house. So you could have a Greek Revival bungalow or a Victorian bungalow or a craftsman bungalow. People just like the term bungalow, so they do have a tendency to use it interchangeably for craftsman, but it's not the same. They were built between 1905 and 1930. They were a very popular housing style across the US. They were based on a native style. They weren't using classical columns. They weren't copying Victorian England. They weren't copying Italian villas. This is a uniquely American style. So it has a low pitched roof. The eaves are not enclosed. The eaves are open. You can see the rafter tails. Part of it's to save money, because these houses were built for the working class. Although you do have fancy examples, they're still mostly working class. The gable ends will either have false beams or purlins, so they look structural, but they're not. They're nailed up there to look fancy. The porches will often have square piers. You don't see columns on this style. You're going to go with the square pier, and sometimes they go all the way down. Ganged windows, they use cottage sashes a lot. So what this looks like, these are both from Seattle. Seattle was a hotbed of craftsman housing, so I did a lot of research on that book where I was looking at craftsman housing in magazines from the time. These were built 1912, 1917, and you can see with the one on the left here, you'll see that pier comes down into the cheek wall here on the side of the stairs. So it just kind of keeps going and then gets bigger. Square pier. These are brackets. These are your exposed rafter tails over here. This is one in Decatur, built 1920. So I love this one because it's painted different colors so you can really see your brackets painted and your craftsman windows. And the next slide is going to give you a detail. So this is called a knee bracket, this one that is in this reddish rust color. It is not structural, even though it looks like it. It's just nailed on there. I had a next door neighbor years ago that had one of these houses and it fell off, the nail rusted through, and we're standing in her garden one day and she's looking at me and she's looking at it and looking back up where it was nailed in. But they look structural and they're very cool. You can see the underside of the eaves, and you see those windows, they're cottage windows. The bottom sash is clear, but the upper sash has 3 vertical lights. I would say 95% of the time that you see that window style, it is a craftsman house. I'm not going to say I've never seen it on another style house, but it is rare enough that I stop if I see it on another house, because that is a ubiquitous craftsman window. So here's another version where you have very rough brick and some stucco used. I like that it's black and white because you can really see the exposed rafter tails. And there you have stacked purlins, so you don't have that knee bracket, but you'll see the white purlins that are triple stacked. Here's an example of a knee bracket. This one's painted white, and these rafter tails are cool because they're scalloped. This is the detail of a house in Decatur down the street from me. It's really cool. Here's another variation of a craftsman. This one is a porte cochere. This one is neat because the rafter tails. Now it's hard to see in this picture, but I'll see it in the detail. Look at those rafter tails. They look like spikes. I've never seen, I mean, they're huge. They really come far off the house. That's going to give you a lot of shade. And if you notice, there are no gutters originally. They do have gutters up there now, but that would have helped keep the water away from the foundation. So there's another detail of the craftsman windows that I told you about, and there's some really fancy ones that have sort of that double X design over on the left. Craftsman doors are interesting. This is where you get regional variations. If I were in the Pacific Northwest, 90-some% of the doors I would run into that were craftsman would look like the one on the left. If you go to Home Depot or Lowe's right now and you say you want a craftsman style door, they're going to sell you something that looks like the one on the left. Here in the South, that's not what we're seeing. Here in the South, we see a lot of what you see on the right. Now the one on the right has more of a crossed shaped muntin design, but sometimes you just have full French design where it might be 15 little panes of glass instead of some more panes of glass with the side lights. Why that is, I can't tell you. It's some sort of regional variation, but that's the type of door you're more likely to see in the South. This is a late 1920s craftsman. Very open glass door. It's not the multi-light, but it has a lot of glazing. That one was in Decatur. This one's in Decatur, 1930. Really fantastic with the diamond-shaped window panes on that front right. Shingles. They like to use shingles a lot for craftsmen, but you can get stone. Down in Homewood, they have a lot of adorable craftsmen that are cobblestone like this. This one's in Decatur. This is a 1916. Exposed knee brackets. This one's 1939. Decatur, you can see there's on the side of the house, there's a porte cochere for a car. This one, instead of the windows having 3, that really big window on the left there has 5 vertical lights in that upper sash. That's a big window. This one, tax assessors is 1934. I'm not sure if that date might not be accurate. Tax assessor dates are notoriously off. But porte cochere, fantastic. That railing, that really interesting cast concrete railing, That is what I've seen on a handful of houses here in Decatur. So I don't know if they were all built by the same builder, but clearly they're following a pattern. Another one, that's the full light French door with the 3/1 windows. This one is a couple streets away in Decatur, 1930s as well, is what they're listing. And sometimes you get the ones that almost look like Japanese pagodas. You're more likely to see those on the West Coast. This one's in Seattle. This is a 1915 house. But I really wanted to show you there's a variation on this style. And then sometimes you get houses that don't have a style or nothing major. This is our last one before we start looking at breakdowns of mishmashes. This is an American Foursquare. It's a form. It is a building type. And they were built between 1900 and 1920. So they always have a pyramid or hipped roof. And they are typically 2 stories. The front door can be centered or it can be on one corner. So you can have an American Foursquare that has colonial revival detailing or craftsman detailing, but sometimes it's so simple that it has no detailing. And so then it has no style. It's just an American Foursquare. So if I'm doing survey work, I would say American Foursquare dash craftsman dash colonial or dash, plain. So this one is actually from Seattle, but I like the black and white because it lets you see the eave details a little bit. If you notice, it doesn't have colonial details really. It doesn't have craftsman details. It does have some details, but they're not really fitting neatly into a style. So this one would just be a basic Foursquare. This one's here in Decatur. No major stylistic detailing. It is just the form, and it is a basic Foursquare, but it's a great plan. They have no hallways normally, so they're really efficient with their space. I love Foursquares on the inside. This one's also Decatur. Basic Foursquare, not a specific style. Same with this one. Now we're going to look at one that has some colonial revival detailing, and you're starting to see it a little bit with the porch, the columns. These can really get changed over time. These are 2 side by side. They probably looked identical at one point in their life. They don't anymore. This is from the Tacoma. These are 2 in Decatur. These have craftsman detailing. If you look at those porches, the porch supports are tapered. Now they've been altered some over time, but it's craftsman detailing. This is another one in Decatur that has sort of that arts and crafts craftsman detailing. This one's from about 1910. It's a particularly fancy one. This one's in Tuscumbia, 1935. Looks like it's a first cousin. Now, it's possible you're thinking, well, gosh, we have houses that don't look like anything you've seen. Well, that's because we've got Spanish Revival, Mission Revival, French Eclectic, Italian Renaissance, and some vernacular, but I didn't have so much time today, so I didn't get into those. They're far less common, though, but this is a Spanish Revival here in Decatur. We have one Spanish Revival. But I want to make this your turn now. So, Paige, do you have a way to unmute everybody? I don't know how many people dialed in.
About 15. Let me go to the controls really quick. Okay, let's see. Okay. Everyone should be able to unmute themselves if they would like to speak.
Yeah, if you want to. So you guys are getting a quiz on this. What style is it? And I know some of my people are on. I will give you double quizzes if some of you don't answer this. No guesses?
If you can't unmute, you can also type in the chat. Okay, Jay Clark says craftsman.
Exactly. So it is craftsman. And what Jay is seeing is it has that modified knee bracket. It has a wide verge board. It has exposed rafter tails. It's got that really low pitched roof. All right, what's this one? I'm going to start the little Jeopardy, like the do, 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 do. No one knows?
Queen Anne.
Okay. Queen Anne. Yeah. And it could be a free classic variation, not sure. It has some columns on there, but I normally need to see the inside on some of these to tell you for sure. So I would go with Queen Anne on this one. What about this one?
We had 3 people answer Tudor Revival.
Exactly. And what about this one?
We had 2 for Dutch Colonial.
It is a Dutch colonial. It's one of the earlier examples that faces the front. And what about this one?
We had, we have another person typing in, and I'm going to wait for them to type first. We had 2 for Foursquare.
It is a Foursquare, and this one has colonial revival elements because you've got those little Tuscan columns on that front porch. All right, this one's a little bit harder because we only looked at a few examples of this, but you ought to be able to figure it out. Look closely at the massing and look at that roof because it's a pyramid roof. What do you think it is? And look at those eaves, that double layer of brackets.
See, I have some people typing, so I'm going to wait just a second. Okay, one of the guesses, or one of the remarks I got was Foursquare, maybe with Italianate application.
It's Italianate. So if you look at that massing, and because it's a dead-on picture, it's hard to see. It's not, a Foursquare is going to be like a perfect rectangle or square. Now you can have a porch on a Foursquare that changes that a little bit, but if you look here, you can see beyond the front where you have eaves sticking out that are part of the main house. So this one's Italianate. Now I'm going to have fun. What's this one?
I don't have anyone typing in the chat yet.
So remember I
Oh,
said,
American Foursquare.
okay, and it's an American Foursquare that has craftsman detailing. It's very odd because they have a gable front porch, which kind of looks like a waste of space in that gable up there on an American Foursquare. But remember, American Foursquare can have craftsman detailing. I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. There's an American Foursquare I ran into in Seattle that had a Tudor Revival porch on the front, and I did a double take because those are incredibly rare. Because most Foursquares are pretty simple, but this one is Craftsman Foursquare. All right, talking about simple, what's this one?
Okay, we have somebody typing. We got a folk Victorian.
Folk
Absolutely.
Victorian.
You are right. That is a folk Victorian. All right, going to make this one a little more challenging.
Wow, that has a lot going on.
It does. Look
We
at
had
the
a guess for
main
Dutch
roof.
Colonial.
Look, okay, Dutch Colonial. But doesn't it look like a Dutch Colonial had a baby with a Tudor Revival? Because that front gable is a Tudor Revival gable on a Dutch Colonial, which is kind of interesting. So we're going to talk about remodels because they can really change how you read a historic house. And this is where people sometimes really struggle because the older the house, the more likely it's had changes. I love this cartoon. It's one of my favorite preservation cartoons. We have this massive empire, revival house, and someone is walking by the street and the homeowner, they're putting on this like 1960 rec room. And he's like, does it look too tacked on? Now, sometimes you can really tell when a house has been changed. This one was in Portland, Oregon. It was an architect design. So they took an amazing craftsman house, and this is what they did to the back of it. They're very proud of this. As a preservationist, I have a slightly different view of this change to the house. I'm just grateful it's on the back side of it. So obviously you can recognize this one pretty quickly. Others get more challenging. This is a craftsman house. This is one I used to walk by a lot in Tacoma. They enclosed the front porch and then they put additions on that second floor. So it's really got a lot going on up on that roof line. This is one of my favorites, and I'm pretty sure these are all gone now. These are 3 craftsman houses in a row, and they show you the differences. You can tell they were all identical at one time in Seattle. but start looking. So this is one in kind of its original shape, right? It has a porch. You have the knee brackets. You have that wonderful window with the multi-lights. You have a cottage window with that little end that sticks out. It's got purlins coming out, the wide verge boards. It's like perfect postcard. 2 doors down, same house, but what did they do to it? Well, they enclosed the front porch. They put new cedar shakes on. When they cedar shake, they enclosed the attic, got rid of the attic window. They changed out the window. I mean, it's lost a lot of its charm, but it makes it harder to read. So that's when you really got to start looking. I often think of looking at house styles. There's a difference between the clothing a person is wearing and someone's skeletal form. Normally the skeletal form will help you first, because even though this is missing a lot of the elements of the clothing, the actual things you put on the form, you can still read enough to see craftsmen. Now this is a different style. This is a shingle style, and we didn't talk about those because I honestly don't know if there are any in Alabama. There might be a couple. The shingle styles are noted to be a very flat style. They're late 1800s. This was a job I got called to, gosh, 20 years ago probably now. And this is what it looked like when I first saw it, and the homeowner wanted some help. And I just went up to it thinking, oh my God, this house is so ugly. I can't say they have an ugly house. Like, this is a big house. Well, I started doing research on it, and I realized, okay, well, first of all, that cedar shake is not original. It would have had a much smaller shingle. It also had a slightly different front porch in terms of the columns. And it also would have had a little balustrade. That window near the chimney would have had a little balustrade around it. So I started working with the homeowner. We found an original picture of it. I was so excited. I found it Christmas Eve. I showed up Christmas Eve on her doorstep. I'm like, because we didn't think there was a photo, and I found it when I was in the archives Christmas Eve, and I'm like, I found one. So they started bringing it back. Now they didn't get to the point where they had put in that balustrade with this photo, but you can really see huge difference. And it's just, they fixed the siding is what they did. That's most of what they did. It's not all of what they did, but that's most of it. This house is in New Jersey. Look at how irregular it is. Look at that clipped corner. Look at how big it is. That was a Queen Anne at one time, but boy, they have filled in windows. They have pulled off gingerbreading. They have changed out that front porch because it clearly rotted at some point. They know what this house used to look like. This house was built in 1887. This is what that house used to look like. So it doesn't take much to take a house that was amazing and really strip it down to very little. Someone posted in a Facebook group, hey, this is the house, we've got it, we're working on it. And I first looked at it and I'm like, wow, okay, that has a mansard roof on it. But those are Craftsman porch supports. And then it's got a deck on the second floor. So, with a sliding glass door. So someone really did a number on it. Here they are, they found historic photos and they're starting to bring the house back. It is actually a modified Gothic. It's the same house. It's just being true to itself as opposed to some really unfortunate plastic surgery. This one is clearly Queen Anne, right? It's fantastic Queen Anne. Well, I was looking at it because this one's in Seattle and I was doing research, and you see up here, see that little window and this odd wall thing? And I'm like, that window doesn't match. I'm willing to bet this was like this is probably a closet at one point or even an open porch, and it got turned into a bathroom later with that window added. Because you'll see that houses this old didn't have plumbing originally, and at some point people are trying to squeeze bathrooms in. Well, that photo looks amazing. This is the way the house looked when built. And again, it's the decoration on the porch and the eaves comes off, right? They rot off. They're no longer fashionable. I went to go see what the house looked like when I was writing the book. It was a parking lot. By the time I wrote the book, there was no house there anymore. So I don't know what it looked like by its end stages. This one's in Tuscumbia. You first go by it and you're like, well, that almost looks like a Craftsman porch, but there's something weird going on with that bay window. That's a little bit unusual. Well, yeah, because it's a full-blown Victorian. It was like probably a Queen Anne, a small Queen Anne Victorian. But that front porch had rotted off, and by the 1920s to 30s, they put a new porch on, and it changes the way you're going to view that house. Most people look at this house and they think, oh, that's just vernacular. It has no style. I saw that house, and this is in Decatur. I saw the transom, and I said, I'm willing to bet it was either a Queen Anne Victorian or a folk Victorian, but the carport's not original, and the siding is not original, and that porch is not original. Well, sometimes you get lucky. Look at what's right next door. They're basically matching houses. but this one is not as altered. So that shows you what a difference it makes as people go through and you start adding porches and closing, changing the original material on the walls. Tuscumbia had so many Victorians that had craftsman porches on them because the original Victorian porches had rotted off, that when I did the field survey work, I actually called it out in one place and said, hey, I'm seeing a lot of these. So what that tells me is they had an influx of money come in the 1920s. There must have been a new industry. People really were spending money fixing up their houses. If you're looking at this and thinking, gosh, this makes kind of a really bad Victorian, something looks off, it's because it's not a Victorian. Look at this clipped corner on the roof. That's not a Victorian roof. That's a craftsman detail that you sometimes see on craftsman homes. When I walked around the side of the house, this one's in Decatur, lo and behold, a knee bracket. Exposed rafter tails. This was a craftsman and somebody, because they're in the historic district at some point many, many years ago, decided historic had to be Victorian. So they were going to make the front porch look Victorian because in their mind, that's what it should have looked like. But it's a craftsman. This poor house went through a massive remodel. It was originally wood. It was turned into a duplex at some point. When they turned it into a duplex, they got rid of the front door. So now instead of 2 windows on the side, you have 2 doors on the side because it's a duplex. The front porch rotted off. They poured a slab of concrete so that the entry level changed. That's why each one of those doors has 2 steps that goes up to them. But look at the roof line. If you look at the house next door, you can see it's essentially the same house. So what is this house? It's a transition between a free classic and a Queen Anne Victorian. It's probably leaning more towards that free classic with those columns. But look at the roof line. Now this one has also had alterations. It has asbestos siding, but it gives you a better idea of what the other one probably looked like originally. This one's a craftsman, but in the 1950s, somebody at Sears made a killing selling this pressed metal porch supports and railings. My uncle put it on his house. So that changed the front entry, and then someone put in this door with the side lights that's probably bigger than the door that was there originally. Maybe they wanted more light. They didn't paint the door, and so it flows off the front of the house a little bit differently. But it is a craftsman. It's just the front entry details have changed. So here's our last quiz of the day. Now we're going to see if you can identify the houses when they've had some major changes. So this house, clearly somebody needed a bathroom or a closet. They took a whole window out on it and then they resided it. What do you think it was before it got altered?
Okay, we got free classic was the response.
Look at the roof. Does Free Classic have a pyramid roof? Is Free Classic square in plan?
Four square.
This is a 4 square that is Colonial Revival. And if you look at that porch over on the far left, they've boxed it in. It may have been open. And how original that porch is, I don't know for sure. I'd need a closer look at the brick and some other stuff. But it is a 4 square. It went through some major stuff. This poor house is probably gone. This is one in Seattle that I loved. Obviously, it has this fake, it's like this asbestos asphalt-based faux brick that comes in these panels that are nailed on it. But in its heyday, when it was beautiful, what might it have been? Look at the clipped corners on that front. What style did we look at that had clipped corners? Anyone typing, Paige?
Nobody right now. This might be one to stump everyone.
This one at one point was either a little baby Queen Anne or possibly a folk Victorian, but it has had everything pulled off of it and covered up. But you have your clipped corners on it. So you look at that form. Here's another one. Look at form because it's had porches enclosed, all kinds of crazy stuff. What was it? Or I guess you could say, what is it? You just need to take all the weird stuff off. Look at that massing. Always start with massing.
Okay, I don't have anyone typing right now.
So
I'm gonna
this one
take a
was a,
guess for this. Oh, okay, I was
all
gonna
right,
guess.
you guess, Paige.
It's Queen Anne,
Exactly. They
and it looks
enclosed the
like the
front
little,
porch.
yeah, the little excuse me, the tower, the turret on the side.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard to tell.
All right, what do we got here? What style has knee brackets?
We had Craftsman as responses.
Exactly, but it's got a new front porch on it. So the front porch isn't Craftsman anymore, but it's a Craftsman house. Now here, this one has a Craftsman porch, but what is the house?
We have somebody typing. Victorian.
Yeah, it's probably a Queen Anne, possibly folk. It's hard to know because it's been modified. This was, what was this? Really low, broad roof. And that
Okay,
front porch has been enclosed.
I have someone typing. Let's see if it comes through in a second. Bungalow was a guess.
Okay, bungalow's a form. What is the style?
Craftsman was another guess.
There you go, Craftsman.
Or response. I shouldn't say guess because these are, if you attended the webinar, you're now educated. So
That's
it is a
right. You
response.
guys are going to be seeing these everywhere you go. So this one clearly is under duress. It's had a garage added. It's had a deck added out front. All the windows, doors, sliding windows, those are not original. But look closely at the massing of the house and look at those canted corners on that front. What was it before it was remodeled?
We have somebody typing, but I'm just going to remark that it actually looks like the rear of the house with that porch and that
It does, doesn't it? But it is the
garage.
front.
Yeah.
It
I
is the
had
front.
Victorian as a response.
Yes, so this one is probably a small Queen Anne. So I'm going to show you a different house, but it has very similar lines. So look at this and imagine, what did that look like originally? It could very well have looked like this one here. But what happens when you strip off all the design elements and you put vinyl siding and you get rid of your windows and then you make a deck? All right, this one's had some changes. The front porch is like a 1950s front porch. Can you figure out though from the massing and that double row of brackets what it was? These little eave brackets. We've only really had one style that has them.
I have one response that is Italianate, and I have another response coming in.
It is Italianate.
That door kind of threw me off.
Exactly. So speaking of doors that throw people off, don't look at the door on this one. Look at those knee brackets and those exposed rafter tails and that low roof pitch. What is it?
Craftsman.
Craftsman. They did a
That's what the
remodel
responses
on
we
it,
have.
and they probably enclosed the front porch, and that's when they did that design. Speaking of enclosed front porches, can you tell what it used to be?
Craftsman.
Craftsman, you have your knee brackets. Now this one always threw me. This one's in my neighborhood, and I always wondered, like, well, what did it look like before they did that? I found a photo when digging through files in the city, and I was so excited. That's what it looked like before they enclosed it. Now, remember that house that was on Facebook last night? Here's the house. It's clearly, you can look at it and look at all the lines. You're like, oh, that was probably a Queen Anne. But that front porch, that's like a 1920s, 1930s red brick. And the porch supports, I doubt those are from the 20s and 30s. So I don't know what the original ones look like from the remodel. This is like remodel generation 2.0, but it is that Victorian lines under. What style was this one before it got an enclosed porch, a new entrance, new windows, vinyl siding, metal roof?
I have a response of Victorian.
Yes. So right next door, this was in Tacoma, literally right next door. Look at this house. That's basically the same house. But if you enclose that porch and put vinyl siding on it and then move the entry over to the left, you'd get that. Now this one's interesting. Somebody really did not like the house style they had. They really wanted to make it look like a different era altogether. So the decorative elements, most of them, but not all of them, are from one era. But if you look at that roof line and a little bit of the roof detailing, you'll see a tail that it's a different design altogether. So what style we got here? Originally, not the applied stuff.
I have someone that said, I think Victorian, maybe some Gothic revival in there.
It's Victorian. It's not, I know this one's not old enough to be Gothic revival because this is one out of Seattle, but it was a Victorian. Now, whether it was a folk Victorian, I don't know, because look what they did to it. And you can see the detailing in this up here. There's your detailing, that Victorian. They left that, but boy, they did a colonial revival multi-light picture window. There's our broken pediment doorway with pilasters. They even did a faux colonial revival, like a la 1950s multi-light colonial window. Whoever did this remodel really wanted colonial revival. All right, here's the last one. This one's, I will say, this one is very difficult. This one threw me. So we're going to see. Look at the massing and then think about what it could have been.
Okay, I've got some people typing. I have the first response that I received is Tudor revival.
Okay. Anything other than Tudor come in?
I have someone that submitted Victorian.
Okay. So I had a homeowner call me out. This was like 20 years ago. And they wanted me to help them. They were getting ready to remodel this house and they wanted to make it look more historic. And I pull up to the front and I'm like, okay, that's like the worst Tudor revival I've ever seen. I can't say that to a homeowner. And so I'm looking at it, trying to figure out, well, what makes it odd? And I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen a Tudor revival with a pyramid roof. Like it just doesn't fit. Something's off. And I went inside the house and some of the doorknobs were much older. So I was like, okay, let me do some research. Seattle's really lucky. They have tax assessor photos from the 30s for almost every house in town. So I was like, let me see what that house looked like in the 1930s. It was a Victorian. I talked to the daughter of the original owners who said, oh yeah, I was a child in the 1930s and mom and dad wanted a garage and we helped dig out the dirt and then they didn't like the house being Victorian. So they added a garage, they excavated out, they changed the front entrance, they made it fashionable because Tudor was fashionable, which is why it's like a bad Tudor because it was never designed as a Tudor. The bone structure does not say Tudor. The bone structure says this was like a little sort of free classic Victorian. What was interesting, when I was working on the book, I went back to get a new photo of it because I was like, oh, I want to see, I don't have a good photo, and I could not find the house, could not, and I didn't have the address with me, and I was kind of mad because I was like, I should have been able to find it, but I'm going to drive home, get the address, come back. Drove back. The reason I couldn't find the house is this house is now this house, which is like the mother of all, this is like Kim Kardashian level of plastic surgery. Like it is unreal. So they wanted a bigger garage. They put a craftsman type front porch. They did some sort of faux Victorian looking shingles on the gables, but then they did an octagonal vent for the roof. It's like a Heinz 57 now. This is one that I would actually call vernacular. I don't use vernacular very often on particularly houses in cities because normally most houses in cities do have a style, but this is one that I'm just like, it has been altered so much that even I could not tell you the original foundation had I not done the research on it. So there's plenty more styles that we don't get to cover. Maybe one of these days I can come back and I can do mid 20th century because you've got like minimal traditional post-World War II era cottages, transitional ranches, and not just plain ranches, but like all kinds of ranches and split levels and contemporaries. I mean, we could get into your classical revival ranch, your Dutch colonial ranch, even your American revival colonial ranch. If you want more information on this, look at these books. The drawings that I had for each chapter, it is a field guide to American houses. They come out of that. That is like the Bible for house identification styles in the US. It's not perfect, but it is exceptionally good. It has almost everything you need in it. If you want to look more at some interior details, because sometimes you can use interior details to help date houses and style houses, both of the two Gottfried books are really good. And you can get these on Amazon. You can get used copies. They don't cost you that much. So I cannot believe I actually made it to the dot. I thought for sure I was going to run right over. So thank you for staying with me this long. If you've got questions, I'm happy to answer anything I can.
And again, you can also use the chat if you have any questions.
Yeah.
Give y'all a few minutes to see if anyone's typing in the bubble. Hey Caroline, I don't know if you can pull this up. I did have a question.
Yeah.
When you were going over Tudor revival styles, and there was
Mm-hmm.
one slide that had two images on the slide. The left side was Tudor revival from Decatur. I think it was one of the earlier slides. But it looked like even though it was Tudor revival, it had this to me like almost large prairie style porch. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like
Yeah, give me a
the thick
second. It's
column.
not prairie style, but I know why you're saying that. It's still craftsman. Let me see if I can pull up the image. Uh, well, I thought I pulled it up. Are you seeing it?
Uh, yes, I think that's the
Okay.
one. Yeah, that the
Yes, this
two-story
one?
one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
No, so it is Tudor revival. So it does have some interesting exposed rafter tails. This right here, this huge sort of slope is almost more craftsman looking because it's in that transition period. But it's a full-blown Tudor revival. Prairie style would not have this kind of gable roof on it. Prairie style is going to go for pyramid. We didn't talk about prairie style today because there's not very many prairie styles in the state. But prairie style is going to have more of like a 4 square type roof on it. It's not going to have this massive pitch. And it's a narrow pitch, which is what's telling you it's Tudor. All right, Jay, I saw your comment on the Home Depot special. That is hysterical. Yes, I probably should start calling some of them that. It absolutely has. Somebody really did a number on that last house. So hopefully now, for all of you that serve on commissions, you've got a better sense of even little details can make a really big difference, and then how you see a style and what is appropriate for the different styles and what is not appropriate for the different styles, and how you sort of work through them, and how these designs work. I really enjoyed sharing all of this with you. It was a lot of fun to put together. If you've got more questions, you can reach out to Paige. She's got my contact info. She can pass you along to me, and I'm happy to help if I can. So I look forward to seeing all of you at a future training. Thank you. Paige, I'm going to hand it back over to
Yeah.
you.
Really quick, I just want to say thank you everyone for attending. We are going to try to put together this Let's Do Lunch program or something similar quarterly from now on. I have a whole list of ideas, and hopefully soon we can invite Caroline back so she can talk about more mid-century modern and more modern contemporary type styles, I should say. So I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and the weekend is upon us, thank goodness, tomorrow. So y'all have a wonderful weekend as well. Thank y'all so much.